Welcome to Mormonland, a podcast all about the news and culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and other Mormon faiths. I'm religion reporter Tamari Kimsley, and I'm joined by senior managing editor Dave Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hey, Dave.
Hi, Tamara.
Before we start, a quick ask. We invite you to go to patreon.com/Mormonland. That is patreon.com/Mormonland, and click on Become a Member. There you can access all of the Tribune's faith coverage, podcast transcripts, and the full Mormonland newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. And if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at Mormon.land. Now for today's episode. A new report by the Pew Research Center, the Religious Landscape Study, has given members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints plenty to pat themselves on the back about. According to the survey of 37,000 U.S. adults, including 565 self-identified Latter-day Saints, active members of the Utah-based faith are some of Christianity's workhorses, showing up for church each Sunday and finding time in between services to pray, read scriptures, and teach their children about their faith, all at enviable rates. At the same time, the study's authors found a significant drop in U.S. retention rate since the last time they polled members in 2014. And women, long heralded as the more reliable sect, appear to now be in the minority. Here to contextualize these and other findings are sociologists Marie Cornwall and Tim Heaton. Both are former professors at church-owned Brigham Young University and editors of the 2001 book, Contemporary Mormonism, Social Science Perspectives. Marie has also worked in the church's research and evaluation department, responsible for, among other things, conducting membership surveys. Marie and Tim, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. All right. So before we get into the details of all the study's findings, I am curious, how much stock should we put in this report's evaluation of U.S. Latter-day Saints, given that its sample size was less than 600 members? And has a margin of error of about 6.2 percentage points.
I'll say I've studied trends over many years, and although you can't put too much weight on one survey because of sampling, response bias, and so on, the responses to many issues in this survey are consistent with many prior surveys. So I think the general picture that's presented is accurate.
Okay, Marie, anything to add to that?
Only that it's important that you pay attention to that 6.2 margin of error.
Sure.
But it's the best we can do in terms of a national sample of Latter-day Saints. So, but I would at the same time offer caution, and that sometimes the findings don't give us a clear picture. They just raise more questions.
Yes, I think that's fair. So with that caveat, what stood out to each of you about the Pew's findings with regard to growth trends and demographics specifically?
Well, I'll take that one. I'll tell you, my area of expertise was in the sociology of religion. So when I look at this report, I see the whole report as more about the religious landscape that presents challenges for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Challenges, I say, because as a church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is experiencing the same environmental struggles as the other churches. And so we should take the whole report, the information about the other churches and the information about retention and decline. We need to take that into account and realize what the church is struggling with.
And what are some of those struggles that you see in the when you're zooming out from just the Latter-day Saint cohort?
Well, clearly, the percent of Christians, the percent of people who identify as Christian is has been in decline. Religiosity is in decline. The stickiness of religion is what they're calling it. That is, used to be that people raised in religious homes were more likely to stay a part of the church, and the report kind of suggests that that's not necessarily true anymore. And the report suggests that there's something going on in the political landscape that's creating problems for Christian churches.
Ooh, that's I'm going to have to ask you to unpack that. That's a little too tantalizing. Although we will get more into specific views about Latter-day Saints and their political views as found in this report. I just on a broad scale, again, looking more generally, what are you referring to there?
When I talk about the political landscape, the tension between liberals and conservatives is being played out in churches. And liberals, it looks like liberals are more likely to leave or to move to more liberal congregations, and conservatives are staying. So there's a tension within the churches themselves, and it seems to be a product of and contributing to the political tensions that we're seeing in the country.
Yeah, Marie, I was going to ask about that, and I can ask Tim of you too now. But let's just go to this subject right now. Given that other research on Latter-day Saints has shown younger Latter-day Saints are starting to abandon a little bit more of the faith solidly Republican leanings to take it away from a political philosophy to an actual partisan thing. I was surprised to see essentially no increase, considering the error margin, in the number of U.S. members identifying as Democrats. It went from 22 to 23%, which means it's essentially a push, if you take the 6% margin of error. What's your take on that stat? Tim, what do you think?
So I did a deeper dive into growth and change, looking at comparing people who left Mormonism, people who joined, and the lifetime members. And it's in most of the variables you look at, the ones who are leaving are much more liberal than the ones who are joining. So if the liberals leave and conservatives join, then the overall trend stays fairly stable. But right now, there are more leaving than joining, certainly in this survey. In fact, I did a analysis of which factors explained most who left relative to those who joined. The younger people are leaving, but the single most important variable was the attitude about homosexual relationships. Should we accept homosexuality? In this survey, the church loses almost 30% of its membership from people who say, I'm in favor of the country accepting homosexual relationships. So if those people leave,
right,
then the members still give about the same response, right, who are still in the church.
Right. Marie, what's your take?
Well, the nice thing about Tim is he always comes up with an explanation in the data. And I think that's clearly what I've seen, that some of the issues that has come to the forefront in the last 10 years has really challenged the younger people and their views about their classmates and who struggle with gender identity and homosexuality.
So LGBTQ issues are a dividing line in some respects. Yeah.
And more so than like climate change, more so than any other kind of salient issue, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, in this survey, that's clearly the case.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's step back a little bit more on the overall. Okay, a little bit. According to the study, Latter-day Saints have represented about 2% of the overall U.S. population since 2007, the first time Pew conducted the study. Does that sound about right to you? In other words, it really hasn't moved the needle much beyond that.
Yeah, that's what most surveys show. But the trends implied in this survey, a lot of Mormon growth came from higher birth rates and higher conversions. So if more people are leaving, so the conversion rate isn't as high and the birth rate's dropping, and now younger people are leaving, and they're the ones that are going to be adding new members in the next 20 years, then it implies that the numbers might decline in the future.
Marie, anything you want to add?
No, I support his notion of the demographic changes very much, and there's been some suggestion that the growth of the church in the United States hasn't been as great, but the church continues to grow in other countries around the world.
So in 2007, when Pew did this, they found that 44% of their LDS respondents were men. And now that's 52%. And then, by that same token, women have gone from 56% to now 47% during that same period. What is happening here? Is the raw number of men going up, or are women dropping out at a faster rate? Do we know?
I think that might be a fluke of this survey because the number of the percent of lifetime members, converts, and people who leave, the percent who are female is the same.
Okay.
And so I think this survey, for whatever reason, just happened to pick up more males than females compared to prior surveys.
Yeah, I was going to ask him, Marie, maybe you can expand on this because look, I know what the numbers in their survey said. That just doesn't seem to match the anecdotal evidence from virtually everyone.
Well, let me just first say that I don't think this survey answers it. But if there is a difference, based on research that was done, 20 years ago, where we began to see some of the highly educated single women leaving, that I would suggest that if there is a trend in that direction, then it's the more educated women. And when I say educated, I'm talking about graduate school, doctors, PhDs, lawyers. But let me emphasize, we don't know based on this data, because I think there are some methodological questions that I have. But if there are women leaving, it's those unmarried, highly educated women.
Although I've also seen research, not about the LDS Church specifically, but religions across the board, that Gen Z women are, from what we can tell, again, all of this with the caveat that these are snapshots in time, Gen Z women are leaving religion, broadly speaking, at a faster rate than Gen Z men. I wonder if that will continue to play out.
Did it break it down by education is what I'm asking.
Probably. And I don't know off the top of my head, but I'll have to pull the study back up.
I'm wondering on the same subject, Tim and Marie, if this portends perhaps that there may be that women are finding issues in a patriarchal church.
Yeah, and the educated, that's my point, is the educated women are feeling it more, maybe, than others. And, having a bachelor's degree these days is like it used to be with a high school. So it's not just the ones that went to college, it's the ones that pursued higher degrees and have some difficulty with the patriarchy. But let me emphasize, this is only a hypothesis. This is not an answer.
Right. Tim, what's your take on that?
Anything I've seen in the data is very consistent with what Marie said, that Mormons are unusual in that their church attendance goes up with higher levels of education in general, but that drops off, just like Marie said, with women with advanced graduate degrees.
Yeah, I wanted to go to that next about a little religiosity questions. Besides the growth trends or whatever, the study looked at church members' behaviors, how often they prayed, volunteered, go to church, things like that. Were there any findings there that either of you found surprising or particularly compelling? Tim, start with you and then Marie.
One thing that's not an exact answer, but there's something that's consistent here with other surveys. If you look at the percent of people in a church who have a college degree, attend church regularly, and are politically conservative, the Mormon Church stands out. They're like 30% compared to 10% or 8% in any other group. So the core, the people who, on the average, who keep things running at the local level are educated, they have the cultural capital, they're active, they go to church often, and they're politically conservative and conservative on the other issues we've talked about. So I think that's a unique aspect to this church.
Emery.
I would agree with Tim. My point of view is that on all of these religiosity items is that Latter-day Saints look good compared to other people, but it also is a function of how they do the analysis, because they're asking, do you identify as a Latter-day Saint? And there's a core of people who are Latter-day Saints, and then there are lots of people around them that are also Latter-day Saints, but would maybe not necessarily call themselves Latter-day Saints. And they may come to church on Christmas or whatever, but unlike Methodists and Presbyterians, they don't call themselves Latter-day Saints. They'll say, yes, I was raised in the LDS tradition.
So in that sense, you're going to get results that are reflective of a more higher activity rates.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And it does seem to be a function of also what a person who identifies a Latter-day Saint presumably might be more involved in the faith.
Oh,
and what the faith requires, demands, encourages, whatever verb we want to use there, right? I mean, not all religions stress reading scripture, whereas the LDS Church does, correct?
If anything, it's low. Even how often it's emphasized.
Still room for improvement.
Reading the scriptures, it should be higher.
Yeah. So you're saying that the church leaders might view these results a little differently, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
How funny.
I don't know if you remember that study The Economist did tracking cell phones on Sunday.
Yes.
Yep.
And everybody exaggerates their church attendance. And if I remember right, Mormon exaggeration was somewhat greater than other groups.
Yeah.
Tamara actually wrote a story about that. So yes.
Everyone does exaggerate it. The LDS, assuming that the methodology is correct, right? But what I found was that if you look at various studies that all depend on self-reported data, people say they go to church regularly in the 70% range. But this study found it was closer to 15%. Now that's huge difference. And for those who aren't familiar with this study, it was based, like Tim said, on cell phone data and tracking and geography. Are you in the building? And thus, removing the self-reporting element out of it. That said, they still went at a higher rate than others polled. So it was everyone's rating themselves on a curve when it comes to church attendance.
Incidentally, the author of that is LDS.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know that I knew that.
Oh, it's my neighbor's son.
Yeah. Perfect. That's a very smart street you live on.
Mormon Land will be right back.
So let's shift now to, I mean, we've kind of teased this a little bit, but the political and cultural issues, and how people view a lot of these hot button issues. Was there anything that stood out to you, starting with Marie?
Let me just say questions about their views on political and cultural issues. I think we have a difficult time with some of these responses. Clearly, Latter-day Saints are still against abortion, but the trend towards even stricter abortion laws may not be reflective of Latter-day Saint views. And I'm not sure this survey really tells us whether they, is a good indicator of that, because there's just the one question. I'm not sure what Tim thinks about it. The questions about climate change are kind of puzzling.
Okay, so following up on that point, I was also curious about this point, because it's true that a lot of these bills being passed in these red states are go further than the church's own policy, which leaves room for, in some cases, individuals and couples to make their own decision. So you think that maybe there needs to be a deeper dive here for us to really understand what is going on with Latter-day Saints, and maybe some friction between that difference, or what would be a more compelling study around this to you?
Well, I'll tell you what I'd like some enterprising sociology student to do is get out in the field and do some interviews on this, because my sense is that some Latter-day Saints who are what they're calling now low information voters may be still very much for the regulation of abortion. I wonder whether or not the younger generation of the church really understands what the position of the church has been for so long in terms of the health of the mother. And much of what is driving these abortion laws are a distrust of women. And I would want to explore that with these women who support this political view, and see whether or not they are as distrustful of women as the Republican lawmakers seem to be. That is, we can go to the rhetoric of the women's rights to choose, but apart from the rhetoric, it's the question of whether or not you can trust a woman to make the right decision. And I'd love to know where Latter-day Saint women sit on that question.
You know what stood out to me was when I did a story on this right around the time that Roe v. Wade was overturned, was a lack of shared definition on what an abortion even represents.
Yeah.
And there was this sense, I talked to some of these LDS women who had what medically would be described as an abortion, but in their minds it wasn't, because it was the fetus, while still alive, was non-viable if born, and there was risks involved. So it was that the cultural narrative and the medical definition actually didn't align.
Yeah.
In many of these instances.
Yeah.
And for them, an abortion was only in the case of a healthy, viable fetal tissue or fetus being removed voluntarily. And so that was interesting to me as well. And just for our listeners, this Pew study showed that 70% of respondents said that abortion should be illegal in most or all cases, which was essentially on par with the previous times that this had been asked. So what more that stood out to me was this question of Christian nationalism. And this is too also a point, I think, where definitions are kind of squishy depending on who you ask and how you ask the question. But 65% of Latter-day Saint respondents in this study said that they supported the United States declaring itself a Christian nation. And to me, that seemed high for a faith group that has been somewhat MAGA skeptical. I'm wondering what either of you made of that, starting with Tim.
Well, one of my favorite talks, we had a person in the bishopric that liked to have a patriotic speech on near the 4th of July, and he didn't know what he was doing, but he asked a historian to do it. One Sunday, and the historian got up and said, the founding fathers were not Mormons with wigs on. But I don't think the, kind of like Marie said, the uneducated voters, I'm not sure if the people of my neighborhood who think we should be able to pray and discuss religion they may not identify with those who really believe in enforcing Christian values in the laws. In this survey, the LDS respondents seem to be willing to have people of all religions in the country and different backgrounds. So I think there's a little inconsistency in our openness versus our sense of this as a Christian nation that people don't understand when they respond to the questions.
Yeah, I agree with Tim on that one. If you look at the question about whether or not the percent who say the fact that U.S. population is made up of people of many different races and ethnicities, it strengthens American society. 76% of Latter-day Saints agreed with that.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is a MAGA response, but I could be fooled.
So you think what you're saying is you think when they say declare itself a Christian nation, they may not know what the implications of some people, what that might mean for many other people.
They don't understand Christian nationalism.
Yeah, exactly. And what it's seeking to do. The thing that I find interesting is that probably many people who do understand that what it means and do want that for the United States may not view Latter-day Saints as Christian.
Oh, I'm sure they don't.
Yeah. Which I find very, more than ironic, so there are some interesting dichotomies sometimes in the survey. And I wanted to go to another one. And Tamara can attest that this interested me because I brought it up all the time with her. So it's on climate change. And the survey found that what compared to the other groups is a high percentage, 36% of Latter-day Saints attributed climate change to natural causes. And scientists, of course, pin much of the blame for the Earth's warming on human action. Not that it's obviously there are natural phenomena involved too, and they certainly would agree with that. At the same time, members overwhelmingly, 74% see science and religion as compatible. And that makes sense given Mormon theology. But in some sense, you can see how do these two findings jibe? How do they work together? Marie, you were interested in that too.
Well, I looked at some of the other items, and you point out the 36%, but if you add the 29% who believe it's from natural causes and 36% that it's from human cause, that's 65% that says the climate is getting warmer.
It's changing, yeah.
Yeah, it's changing. So I think it's important to see that as there's acknowledgement in this group of Latter-day Saints that the climate is getting warmer. And 80% believe that God has told Latter-day Saints to protect and care for the earth. So that's another piece. And then there's another question in there about is trying to regulate worth the cost? 46% versus 51%. So when you take all three of those numbers together, it tells me Latter-day Saints understand things are getting warmer. that they know they're supposed to protect the earth, but it's not a common topic in Sunday school. And a lot of them are not sure it's worth the cost of government regulation, which kind of reflects, I suspect, the occupations that Latter-day Saints find themselves in. So the long and short of it is, I would not say that 36% that you're talking about is about accepting science. It's about the conflict that Latter-day Saints feel around what do you do about it.
Tim, do you have a take on this?
So there are my sense is Mormons aren't really anti-science, but there are two ideologies. One, God has a plan and the earth's going to end okay for some people, and religion trumps science. If you take those two positions, plus this core of educated but conservative people who manage a lot of the everyday goings on in wards and religious communities, then the specific political expression of values about the earth get left on the wayside.
Mm-hmm. I would be very curious about what the age breakdown would show on the climate change questions. It's a subject we've talked about before on this podcast and in news stories, of course. We know that generally speaking, research has shown that young people are much more concerned about climate change. It's their future much more than older people, I guess, too.
Yeah.
So I would be very curious to see if there's some difference there again among the membership.
Marie, you said something that caught my ear, which is the occupations that they find themselves in might lend them to take this view that is more hesitant to want to cede a lot of control over this topic to government, if I'm interpreting you correctly. Wondering if what you were thinking there, like, do a lot of members work in oil and gas, or?
Well, do members work in business and don't want the government regulating them? And it could be oil and gas. It could be any kind of business doesn't want government regulation.
Got it. Yeah, and that does fit with what they said about wanting smaller government generally. They were I think, the most pro smaller government of all the religions that were surveyed. Okay, so final question. What trends are you two going to be watching going forward? Say the next time Pew puts out its religious landscape study in another 10 years or so.
Demographically, we call it the momentum of growth, that even though the birth rate is stable, but you've had a high birth rate in the past, you'll continue to grow because you have more young people that will become parents in the future. But now the birth rate is closer to replacement. Liberals are leaving. People are leaving in general. I think overall numbers might decline, and the membership might stay equally conservative even as the nation shifts. So I think there might be larger differences in the future.
Well, Tim, are you referring to mainly because this is a survey of the U.S. Remember, this is a global church, of course,
right?
And so you're talking about mainly in the U.S. That's what you'd be seeing.
Yeah,
because we know the church is growing more rapidly in the global South. Yeah. So okay, Marie.
Well, actually, the most interesting trend for me is the stickiness of religion, and my early research in sociology was the influence of family on keeping their children in the church, and I really have seen that we're losing young people. I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but clearly we're losing younger generations, and probably for the same reason that other churches are our rate seems to be lower because I think there are some unique things that the Latter-day Saint Church offers that keeps people active. But this report is not good for religion, I don't think, for the future, and certainly not for Christianity.
So the headline of this Pew Research study was something like Christianity's decline stalled. And I think at least on the surface, maybe there is some hope after all, but you don't see it that way.
Well, not if you read the fine print. And it's all about Christianity. That is, the numbers who identify as Christians has leveled off. And I guess some of the religiosity has leveled off. But some of that could be COVID and the numbers of people that we lost during COVID, the experience of death and the struggling with it. Life tends to bring people back to be more religious. But I think the overall trend is downward. We may be on a plateau for a while, but in the end, I see us moving down more. And I don't know what we can do about it.
To support your observation, it is true that even the authors pointed out that unless there's a change in trajectory, as older, more religious people die out, the less religious young people replacing them will inevitably lead to a decline, reasserting itself. So, well, Marie and Tim, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to Dave Noyce and to our producer, Chris Samuels. We remind you, our listeners, that you can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the church or to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.